Let's face it, there's a lot to be worried about in shipping right now. All norms have been overthrown. Economic stability is crumbling beneath our feet along with the rules-based order that we rely on. In a market where free trade is under threat and geopolitical tensions are escalating, decisions get deferred, investment gets scaled back, and doing nothing starts being passed off as pragmatic stewardship. There's no value in making long-term decisions right now. Or is there? For this week's podcast, I want you to put your cynicism on hold and let me pitch you the optimist's view. I put it to you that doing nothing is actually now the most expensive option on the table. Now, bear with me on this because I know that in the wake of last month's MEPC 83 meeting, the point at which shipping became the first sector to agree a globally binding carbon price, that the focus has inevitably veered towards the uncertainty that remains. The IMO net zero framework, for those of you who have not been paying attention, is that complicated, underpowered result of a messy compromise, the opposite of what shipping had wanted going into MEPC 83. The industry's brightest wonks are still struggling to translate what it all really means for green investments. But the fact that it even exists, frankly, is remarkable. Other industries' green zeal has withered. Energy majors have performed ungainly U-turns. Climate change denial is now pretty much policy in some countries. Shipping, however, has found itself in the unexpected position of being a climate leader rather than a laggard. Even with some of the key details missing, I think there is a clear case to assert that shipping actually now has a clear direction of travel. If the IMO's target of a 65% cut in fuel greenhouse gas intensity by 2040 is to be achieved, a fuel revolution is the only option. Now, the rules don't tell us yet how to do that, but cutting carbon intensity by that much is only really possible with a few ways, which brings us to synthetic green e-fuels. A longer, slower transition leaves time to solve the practical problems and explore the technologies like nuclear. Ship owners have time to work out with some degree of confidence how far they can move ahead with what they have right now. They know LNG-fueled vessels look good in the early years, but ammonia-fueled orders look better beyond 2028. They know they'll have to wait longer for that fuel, since MEPC 83 did a pretty poor job of incentivizing its production, but that's where the optimism and faith in a long-term horizon comes in. The necessary greenwashing backlash, which injected some realism, I would say, into shipping sustainability debate, and MEPC 83 offered the beginnings of some tangible certainties, with the promise of more to come. Now, there is much yet to be clarified, we know that, but the case for optimism is worth listening to, and that's what I'm offering this week, with the resolutely rosy thinkers at the Global Maritime Forum. And speaking to me this week, you will hear an old friend of the podcast, Johanna Christensen, Chief Executive of the Global Maritime Forum, Jesse Farnstock, Director of Decarbonisation at the Global Maritime Forum, and Stephen Fewster, Treasurer of the Poseidon Principles and Global Lead Shipping Finance at ING Bank. But let's start with that central point, that doing nothing is now the most expensive option on the table. Here's Stephen Fewster to start us off.
Well, if you take into account the cost of the fuel and the remediation units, the cost of that is going to be more than buying traditional fuel and putting in, for example, some drop-in fuels, biofuel. And that's just a simple equation. There's no rocket science around that. And indeed, then if you start to factor in the cost of some energy-saving devices, which will reduce your fuel consumption, again, the returns you can get from that, and the savings, therefore, that you make in not having to buy the remedial units, is again a cheaper option still. And as you start to move towards e-fuels, everything I've seen suggests that is again cheaper, and ammonia being the most cost-effective solution by, I think, sort of the mid-2030s. It's not a difficult calculation.
It is, of course, very easy to be cynical about a lot of what is happening right now, but there are reasons to be cheerful, and the fact that shipping finds itself out in front of all other sectors right now, when it comes to decarbonising at least, well, that is surely something to celebrate. Johanna Christensen is one of the most optimistic people I know, and unsurprisingly, She thinks we need to take the win of MEPC 83 and move forward with gusto.
The shipping industry should be incredibly proud of the achievement that's been made. Governments from countries that we see at odds in every other context nevertheless came together at the IMO and came up with an agreement that puts us, to Stephen's point, on the right path. There was an enormous amount of support from across industry, not just from the shipping industry, but energy sector, the cargo owners, the financial sector, and others. So it really, the whole ecosystem was supportive of a good outcome. And from that point of view, it's something to be proud of. I know it can be, and I think many others have found themselves in that position, it can be lonely at the front, but this is where shipping finds itself right now. And that's something to be proud of, and it's something to flag proudly. It can be a leader in this transition. It is a leader in this transition. But there are other sectors that are right behind, right? So I think that's the thing that I'm encouraged by. We can see that some of the energy projects that are coming to investment decision and that are beginning to come to market with their fuels, those are projects that are happening in collaboration with other sectors. And so we see other sectors moving as well. And so while, yes, shipping is in front, there is a big block of other sectors right behind. So I remain optimistic from that point of view.
Let's be clear here, though. Shipping has done something that nobody else has. So is that a lonely position to be in?
It's a lonely position, but that doesn't, by definition, make it a bad position to be in. And I'd say that the advantage of being in the lead is that we can set our course as we choose as an industry, rather than having to follow somebody else's choice. We're in control now because we are in the front, and I think that's good. And we have a big advantage in terms of having a global regulator. Sometimes that can be a disadvantage, but I think, we are optimists in shipping. That's why we stay in shipping, and we have to view it as an advantage and make the most of that advantage.
If you are listening to this podcast, I'm going to assume that you have at least a working knowledge of what's been happening at the IMO and the significance of what was decided at MEPC 83. If you need a refresher, I recommend you go back and listen to our pretty excellent audio wrap that we delivered directly after that meeting was concluded. But I also know that very clever, very informed people are struggling with some of the complexity of what that meeting has given us. So here's a very quick view from Jesse Farnstock, Director of Decarbonisation at Global Maritime, to get you up to speed.
Yeah. So I think that for the existing fleet, basically a ship owner operating on any given fuel is now going to be able to figure out how to make that vessel comply with that fuel. And we can see that, there likely is some competitive advantage for LNG vessels in the early years. And for the purchase of new vessels, I think, our assessment shows that dual fuel vessels, particularly dual fuel ammonia vessels, are likely to be a very competitive option, even competitive to begin operating at the start of this period in 2028. If operators are able to secure the fuel, they may get great advantages from deploying these vessels early. So I think in terms of purchasing new vessels, there's a pretty clear signal. And then there's the question of fuel production. And I think the signal is less clear there because there are many ways to operate these vessels under compliance, different volumes of fuel that might be included, uncertainty as to whether blue ammonia or green ammonia will be receiving rewards. Those kinds of still to be decided matters are probably more important for the fuel producers' investment decisions than for the shipping industry. So I think ship owners can probably move ahead with a reasonable degree of confidence. And I'm hoping that the remaining decisions around rewards for zero and near zero fuels will help fuel producers do that too.
All of which is absolutely worth noting. But here's a question. Why shouldn't we be that concerned about the uncertainty that is still embedded in the decisions yet to come?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we've done in our analysis is strip back the agreement to what we can be very certain of, and even in that case, it's pretty clear that a dual fuel ammonia ship, for example, is going to be a competitive investment option, and so we expect a lot of ship owners to move in that direction. So even assuming even assuming the hard agreements that have been made so far only, and ignoring the guidelines that have yet to be developed, we think there's a lot of clarity for ship owners to make decisions on.
Okay, but what about the finance question? Are the banks now confident that they have sufficient confidence in what happens next in terms of managing their risk, and ideally catalysing green investment? Here's Stephen again.
Well, I think we've always kind of had a pretty good view on who we can lend to and those that we don't want to lend to. And that has always really been based, at least since the formation of Poseidon Principles, around their approach to decarbonisation and sustainability. So for those clients who have a decarbonisation plan and they acknowledge their responsibility to decarbonise, those are the clients we want. Now, if a client says to us they're not interested in that, they just want to run the ship for as long as they can and as hard as they can, that's not the client we want. Now, in that respect, I don't think MEPC has necessarily changed that. What MEPC has done is that we will need to have a much better understanding of how the owner is going to decarbonise and what his fuel choice is, because the total cost of ownership is going to become incredibly important. And that's, going back to my earlier comment, running ships on existing fuel will be the most expensive option. And therefore, those owners that switch to the new fuels, that do the retrofits, are going to have a competitive advantage, which we will to much better assess than we've been able to before, given some of the detail that we do have from MEPC 83. So I suppose in short, we're going to have to factor this into our credit decisions, whereas before sustainability was more of a decision around our reputation as a responsible lender.
All of which is positive, of course, but we're essentially talking about who the banks won't lend to being the driver of change here. Is there anything that we could look forward to in terms of an incentive from the banks, do you think?
Well, what we do today, which we would like to do more of, but we need more support from the regulator. And what we do today is we do provide what we call sustainability improvement loans. And within that loan, there will be certain targets, typically around decarbonisation and typically based around the Poseidon Principles decarbonisation pathways. If those targets are met, then the owner gets a small reduction in the margin. And the reason that it's small is because that is money out of the bank's own pocket, and every reduction reduces our return on equity. And of course, we are a commercial operation, so there are limits to what we can effectively give away for free. What I would really like to see is the regulators, the banking regulators, recognising what we're doing and recognising that by decarbonising the industry, we're inherently reducing the risk and the transition risk and the stranded asset risk, and therefore give us an ability to have a lower level of equity backing that loan. Because every time they reduce the equity, we can reduce their margin and still retain our return on equity figure, if that makes sense.
As I said at the beginning, there's no shortage of fairly obvious reasons to be concerned about shipping's decarbonisation agenda getting blown off track. But it's not all about to disappear just because the political agenda in the US has shifted and the hydrogen economy has faltered beyond some of the frankly empty promises that were being made a few years back. And this is a podcast for optimists this week, don't forget. So I will end with an optimist view from our panel.
Well, I think it's much more likely we can get there post-MEPC 83 than it was pre-MEPC 83. And the reason I say that is because I think what that has done is it has given us a sense of direction. We do know now, at least in a big picture sense, what the attractions of the new fuels are and what the disadvantages are of sticking with the old fuel. So I think that has been the positive. But I think the other positive is that, if we look at this, we should be able to see, and the energy companies should be able to see, that there will be a demand in a meaningful way for these new fuels. And if they pick up on that and produce it, and I believe they will, then I think that is, why we should be optimistic.
Can I build on what Stephen said? Yeah, I would just to pick up on Stephen's last point. I mean, we spent 4 years talking about the chicken and egg. I mean, there's a case that we have a chicken now, right? And I think that any ship owner looking at this agreement will have to acknowledge that there is going to be a future fuel in its portfolio at the back end 2040. And if you start to look at what you can do by deploying that now and the money you can potentially generate through the incentives created in the net zero framework, it makes a lot of sense to start moving on these fuels. And I think that will, as Stephen said, send a demand signal to the producers.
I think I come back to, a little bit where we started, which is that the shipping industry does have a global regulator. And despite all the headwinds, that global regulator came through. Now, the headwinds remain strong, and there are different arenas where the headwinds are much stronger even still. But I'm optimistic about the IMO's role in continuing to push forward, and it's proven its mettle in some ways, right? And I think we should recognize that, and so that makes me optimistic as well.
Look, I'm not going to pretend that all is well and there are not serious issues and concerns to deal with. Of course there are. But I do think it's important that we take a considered look at the long term and balance that against the immediate headwinds. If you're listening to this in the week that it's being published, then many of you, like me, will be preparing for an outing to Oslo, where we will hear what has traditionally been a pro-green agenda in an audience made up of pragmatic Scandinavians. And I wonder how they'll be faring this year. We shall see. Feel free, of course, to stop me out and about at North Shipping and strongly disagree with my unusually Pollyanna-ish take this week. I am always up for your input. We will be putting out a slightly more frequent series of podcasts over the North Shipping period. But in the meantime, thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. Bye.